In the land of Skyrim, there is the Grey Quarter, a rundown section of Windhelm that was once known as the Snow Quarter, and is now inhabited by Dark Elf refugees who fled the destruction of Morrowind, be it from the eruption of Red Mountain or the Argonian invasion. But sadly, the Dark Elves, along with the Argonians that live on the Windhelm docks, are treated rather poorly, nothing more than second-class citizens. The Grey Quarter itself is cramped, poor, and looked upon as the slums of Windhelm, and the Nords will often mock the Dunmer or claim they are Imperial spies, wishing they would just leave the city altogether. There has been much discussion about the Grey Quarter, especially when arguing for or against the Stormcloaks, but I want to take a closer look at not only the Dunmer of the Grey Quarter, but also the Argonians living on the docks and shed light on many questions. How badly are the Dunmer treated? Are they just lazy and unwilling to help themselves? Do the Nords of Windhelm really hate the Dunmer? Do the Argonians and Dunmer of Windhelm really hate each other? And are the Dunmer secretly Imperial spies plotting to take over Windhelm? Hello my fellow Hirelings of House Telvanni, I'm Neloth, and we will be answering all of these questions in this very video. Now, before we begin, I do want to state the obvious that I am a YouTube channel that has a particular affinity towards the Dunmer, specifically the Telvanni. And so I want to state that I will attempt to be as unbiased as humanly possible, which should be easy as most Telvanni like me are sociopaths that care only for themselves. Lastly, I don't care about Skyrim's civil war in any way, as both sides have their issues, so don't think this is some Stormcloak hit piece. Now, with all that being said, I think it is most important to start with the history of the Grey Quarter and how the Dunmer ended up here in the first place, especially because I don't think people realize how long these Dark Elves have lived in Windhelm. So, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. But seriously, an event known as the Red Year occurred in Morrowind in the 5th year of the 4th era, where the meteor above Vivec city called Bardau chose violence and crashed right into the city, eviscerating it and heavily affecting the regions beyond from Balmora to Sadrith Mora to even Solstheim. The reason for this destruction was due to the absence of the Tribunal after the events of Morrowind, but more specifically Vivec, who kept the meteor floating high above with his divine powers. This wasn't the end of the Red Year, however, as shortly after, the big volcano in the center of Vvardenfell, Red Mountain, began to erupt violently, spreading massive amounts of smoke and toxic ash that left portions of Morrowind and almost all of Vvardenfell completely uninhabitable. And if having much of your homeland become unlivable in a single year wasn't bad enough, the next year a faction of Argonians called the an-xileel invaded Morrowind and captured much of its southern borders and killed many Dunmer. This invasion was called the Accession War and lasted 22 years. Now, because of this apocalyptic shitstorm, you can understand why many Dunmer fled, and Skyrim was simply the closest nation, and it's not like they're gonna flee into Blackmarsh, and Windhelm was the first stop for many of these refugees. Now, I think it's also very important to understand that the game Skyrim takes place in the year 201 of the 4th era, 196 years after the Red Year. For humans, this would mean that 8 generations would have been born after the event. But because elves have a longer lifespan that doubles or even triples that of men, we could conservatively estimate that 3 to 4 generations of Dunmer have passed since the Red Year. The reason I'm bringing this up is because many of the Dunmer we see in Windhelm, and all of Skyrim for that matter, were not born in Morrowind, but instead in Skyrim. Meaning they have lived in Skyrim for as long, if not longer, than many of the Nords we see, given their lifespan, and they have not witnessed the Red Year. This will be critical information that I will reference multiple times later. When we enter Windhelm for the first time, we will see two Nords, Rolf Stonefist and Angrenor Once Honored, harassing a dark elf, Suvaris Athernon.
You eat our food, you pollute our city with your stink, and you refuse to help the Stormcloaks.
We haven't taken a side because it's not our fight.
Hey, maybe the reason these Greyskins don't help in the war is because they're Imperial spies.
Imperial spies? You can't be serious.
Maybe we'll pay you a visit tonight, little spy. We got ways of finding out what you really are.
From this dialogue alone, we can learn a lot about the social aspect of these two races. These Nords view the Dunmer with disdain and go so far as to accuse them of being Imperial spies. Meanwhile, Suvaris is just trying to live her best life and believes that the Civil War is not her fight, a sentiment expressed by many people, even other Nords. And if we question her on why people would think she's a spy, she will say,
Some of these Nords will come up with any excuse to despise us. And it isn't just the Dark Elves they hate. They make a target of the Argonians as well. In fact, just about anyone who isn't a Nord is fair game for their bullying.
Well, now we have to answer this question that's been put in front of us. Are all of the Dunmer secretly Imperial spies? Maybe they secretly caused the Red Year to happen so they could move in and spy on the Stormcloaks centuries before their uprising even began. Well, actually, if we go into the new Nissus Corner Club and make our way to the second floor, we will see something quite interesting. Heavy Imperial armor, an Imperial sword and shield, as well as a goddamn banner to make it more fucking obvious than it already is. Argonian egg on my face. So this clearly shows that the Dunmer are indeed Imperial spies, right? Well, not exactly, because now I have more questions than answers. Who does this armor belong to? Why is it out in the open? And what spy puts a fucking banner of their faction they are spying for on the goddamn wall? I am of the opinion that these memorabilia aren't that of a spy, or at least a professional spy, but instead a retired Imperial soldier proud of their service, perhaps even a legate. Because again, what spy would do something like this? Margaret in Markarth, who is an Imperial spy looking into the Silverblood family, has absolutely no physical evidence beyond a letter she keeps in her room. And if you're an Imperial spy, wouldn't you instead wear light armor instead of heavy armor? This is the armor of a frontline soldier, not a spy or scout. But who is the secret Imperial soldier? According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls page, Ambaris Rendar, the innkeeper of the Corner Club, is described as a true supporter of the Empire and keeps a set of Imperial armor. However, I am inclined to disagree that Ambaris was once an Imperial. His dialogue suggests that he wasn't even born from a refugee, but instead was born in Morrowind and later came to Skyrim after some time, or was one of the original refugees, making him possibly over 200 years old.
When I've made enough money, I'm going to return to Morrowind in hard style.
The issue is that Morrowind hates the Empire because they pulled most of their army out during the Oblivion Crisis, leaving Morrowind to fend for itself against hordes and hordes of Daedra. And this pullout happened 5 years before the Red Year and before the refugees started coming in, enough time to build a great deal of resentment towards the Empire. Even when the Empire takes over Windhelm, Ambaris doesn't praise them. Instead, he is just glad that they are free from Ulfric's Stormcloak. So you might ask, who else could it be? Well, Ambaris does have an employee that lives in the Corner Club like him, named Malthyr Elenil. Malthyr's dialogue, in my opinion, suggests that he was born in Skyrim rather than Morrowind, but does wish to go to Morrowind someday.
Not a day goes by that I don't think about returning to the ancestral home of my people.
If the Imperials take over, he will also say they have a more cosmopolitan view of the world, as if referencing personal experience. Now, yes, Malthyr does talk about returning to Morrowind similar to Ambaris, but the difference is that Malthyr refers to Morrowind as his ancestral home, while Ambaris does not. Am I looking too deep into it? Well, obviously, I'm making a goddamn YouTube video overanalyzing the situation that's probably gonna be 30 minutes long. Whether you agree with my assessment or not, I am still of the belief that whoever the Imperial Dunmer is not a spy. Because not only would he be stupid for plastering a damn flag on the wall, but I don't feel his position as a Dark Elf would make him a very effective spy. It is clear from the dialogue between the Nords and Dark Elves that the Dunmer are looked down upon, with Ulfric Stormcloak being unwilling to listen to their pleas. They likely aren't even allowed in the Palace of Kings, making it more difficult for a Dunmer spy to get in and listen to war plans or steal confidential documentation. It would be far more effective for the Empire to send a Nord spy into Windhelm, like they did in Markarth, as Margaret, who is a confirmed spy, is indeed a Nord. And even if I'm wrong and Malthyr is actually a spy, I don't feel that his individual choices should reflect on the entire Dunmeri refugee population. Also, Rolf wasn't a prophet for claiming that the Dunmer were indeed spies. He was clearly trying to come up with some reason to justify his disdain for the Dunmer. It just so happens that one of his inane claims was half right. Speaking of Rolf, a Nord who hates the Dunmer so much that he'll walk their streets at night and spew hate and disdain, we already know that the Dark Elves are not treated super well, but how bad is it? And when did it begin? Well, first, if we examine the floors and walls of Windhelm's various houses outside of the Grey Quarter, we will see that they are in decent condition, with the exception of the odd broken plank or two. This is the case from the richest houses to the poorest, including the stables outside of the city inhabited by an Altmer couple. However, when we examine the various houses inside the Grey Quarter, we will see that the conditioning is much worse. There is much debris on the floor, exposed planks that showcase dirt, and the wood on the walls is rotting, which can lead to disease for the Dunmer population. With the exception of the debris, which I feel could be cleared with a simple goddamn broom, but I understand it's there for thematic reasons, the destitute state of the houses clearly shows that not only are the Dunmer far poorer than anyone else, but they are not being given access to the same supplies for repairs as the rest of the city. Even the High Elves live better, who you think would be far worse off since, I don't know, the fucking Thalmor exist. But why is this the case? Well, according to the book Scourge of the Grey Quarter, written by a Nord named Frilgeth Horsebreaker, nice name, the reason is because the Dunmer are lazy and refuse to work. However, this isn't true, because in fact, every single Dark Elf in Windhelm is employed and works for a living. Ambaris and Malthyr may get upset at their friends for working for the Nords, but even they both run a corner club and make a living, contributing to the city's economy. Aval Athernon sells meat as a street vendor, Faril Athernon works for Bolfrida Brandymug as a farmhand, Suvaris Athernon works as a clerk for the Shattershields, Balin Hlalu owns his own farm, Luafin performs music at the Candlehearth Hall, Edessa Sadri works as a nanny, Revan Sadri owns a general goods store, and Voldessa Giryan works as a sailor for Captain Kjar on the North Wind ship. What's ironic is that, statistically speaking, the Dunmer we see in-game in Windhelm are 100% employed, while the Nords are not, with the two beggars, Angrenor and Silda, both being Nords and not having jobs. This means that the idea that the Dark Elves don't contribute to the city and only laze about is false, as half of them work for the Nords and the other half work for themselves and contribute to the city economically. What's interesting is that in the book, Scourge of the Grey Quarter, it suggests that Hoag Stormcloak, the father of Ulfric Stormcloak, was far more fair to not only the Dunmer, but also the Argonians as well. Malthier also mentions that the Grey Quarter didn't used to be so bad, suggesting that their treatment was better under Hoag, but turned worse when Ulfric became Jarl. This leads me to believe that the economic disparity and poor quality of life for the Dunmer isn't a result of them being a bunch of slackers and peace-loving hippies, but a result of Ulfric Stormcloak's direct rule, as well as some business-owning Nords that refuse to pay their Dunmer and Argonian workers a fair wage. Now, I mentioned the Argonians a few times, and while this video is more focused on the Dunmer, I want to tackle them as well and some beliefs people have on the Argonians that relate to the Dunmer. See, the Dunmer aren't the only ones treated poorly. In fact, one could argue that the Argonians are treated even worse, as they aren't even allowed inside the city walls, but are forced to live and work on the WIndhelm docks unloading cargo. But they are only paid scraps for their work. Scouts-many-marshes even has dialogue with Ambarus, where he says he is paid 8 septims a day plus lodging, which is truly nothing. I could piss more coins than that. Torbjorn Shattershield, who employs the Argonians, will even state that they aren't even worth the meager pay he already gives them, at least until the player steps in to convince him otherwise. But, as I said previously, the Argonians aren't even allowed within the walls of Windhelm, a decree that was made by Ulfric Stormcloak himself. Many people will say that this decree by Ulfric was because he was concerned for the Argonians' safety, but this isn't true, considering his father Hoag was apparently okay with letting them in. Some people will even go so far as to say the reason the Argonians are kept by the docks is because the Dunmer may retaliate as they dislike Argonians. But this also isn't true because, again, the majority of Dunmer in Windhelm, and all of Skyrim for that matter, are born in Skyrim rather than Morrowind. They were not around to see the Argonians kept as slaves by the Dunmer houses, nor witnessed the invasion and slaughter at the hands of the an-xileel. There is a big difference between the Skyrim Dunmer and the Morrowind Dunmer. When talking to Bolfrida, Faril will state that he has never even seen Morrowind before, which makes sense since he and many other Dark Elves are descendants of refugees that fled Morrowind 196 years ago, which is a very long time even to the average Dunmer. But obviously not to a superior Dunmer like the sexy Neloth. Even though scouts-many-marshes isn't allowed in Windhelm, there is still dialogue in the game files between him and Ambarus, where Ambarus complains to him about the Nords and wants scouts and the rest of the Argonians to stand up for themselves. I feel that this limited interaction between the Dunmer and Argonians shows that there really is no bad blood between them. The only exception to this rule is Suvaris Athernon, who treats the Argonians poorly, calling them lazy and withholding rations, but I feel this is due to her managerial position and not due to her race. And if that wasn't enough, Skyrim has another city where many Argonians and Dark Elves dwell in, called Riften. And if we look at the interactions between the Argonians and Dunmeri citizens, we see they are relatively peaceful, indicating there is no true bad blood between the races. This is likely because, again, many of the Dunmer we see were born in Skyrim or Cyrodiil rather than Morrowind. The most bigoted interactions we see in Riften are from Nords like Grelka or Volwulf antagonizing the Argonians.
Hey, Greenskin, close your mouth. Some of us are trying to eat over here.
There's no need to be rude, Grelka. If you don't care for Argonians, then perhaps you should take residence somewhere else.
Or perhaps you should crawl back into whatever swamp you came from, lizard man.
You're not going to go into a fight, so I'll get kicked out, Grelka. Eat your food and leave me at peace.
Now, even if the Empire takes over Windhelm and Brunwulf Freewinter is installed as Jarl, the Argonians will still remain outside. Brunwulf will explain that it is for their own safety because many Nords in Windhelm believed, as Ulfric did, that outsiders shouldn't be trusted. So because of this information, I am of the belief that Ulfric Stormcloak did not banish the Argonians to the dockyard simply for their own safety because he is just so compassionate about other races. Rather, it is likely because he views them with disdain just like all outsiders, and many people agreed with his way of thinking. As Brunwulf says,
"Whenever a group of marauders attack a Nord village, Ulfric is the first to sound the horn and send the men. But a group of Dark Elf refugees gets ambushed, a group of Argonians or a Khajiit caravan, no troops, no investigation, nothing. But Ulfric is set in his ways. For him, there's two kinds of people in this world. Nords and the folk beneath them."
Now, we've talked a great deal about the Dunmer, their poor conditions and treatment, but I also want to analyze how the Dunmer feel about the whole situation with Ulfric, Windhelm, and the Nords as a whole, as there is some interesting information we can pick up. Ambarys seems to be the one that hates the Nords the most, because of how they treat his people. This immense disdain likely comes from being one of the only Dunmer who may have originally been born in Morrowind. According to Aval Athernon, Ambarys' views seem to be a little extreme, but he is one of two Dunmer that hold incredible hatred towards the Nords. Even Malthyr, who works for Ambarys and hates Ulfric and the Stormcloaks as much as Ambarys, still shows a willingness to work with other Nords like Brunwulf in an effort to make the Grey Quarter and Windhelm as a whole better for everyone. And every other Dunmer seems to hold the same attitude as Malthyr. Some, like Aval, are upset that his brother and sister work for the Nords instead of themselves, but even he will thank Brunwulf for trying to help his people out, even attempting to offer Brunwulf a discount. However, again, because of their poor treatment at the hands of the Nords, it is understandable that they may not look at every Nord with praise and admiration. This is further shown in a random encounter where we see a Dunmeri farmer that the wiki refers to as Bodrin, who talks about how he was born and raised in Skyrim, yet the Nords treat his people like dirt. This treatment led him to making the decision to run to Solitude to join the Empire, because he wishes to be on the right side, as he says, which again is understandable given his position. Now, if you remember, I said that Ambarys is one of two Dunmer that holds extreme views against the Dunmer, and that's because there is a Dunmer who has some pretty wild beliefs. His name is Athol Saris, and while we can never meet him in-game, we can come across a book he wrote called Dunmer of Skyrim. This book is extremely interesting because in it, Athol claims that his people are plotting to slowly take over Skyrim and slaughter all the Nords. If this statement is true, that all Dunmer are involved in a plot to establish Dunmeri supremacy in Skyrim, they are doing a truly fucking horrible job since they have been living in squalor for 196 years. Hell, Cyrodiil has more quote-unquote Dunmer supremacy since the Count of Cheydinhal was a Dunmer named Andel Indaris during the events of Oblivion. We know next to nothing about Athol since he doesn't appear in-game, but if I had to guess, he was most likely one of the original refugees that fled Morrowind almost 2 centuries ago, and couldn't come to grips with the fact that he was no longer in Dunmer land. I also like to think that because of his supremacist rhetoric, he may have been a member of the Kimona Tong, a Dunmeri crime syndicate that had extreme supremacist ideals and beliefs, wanting nothing more than to kill all of the foreigners in their sleep and drive their influence from their land, a sentiment similarly expressed in this book. In Morrowind, we can even encounter a bandit ringleader who shares his last name, Daldur Saris, who might be Athol's father and may have connections to the Kimona Tong, but that's just extreme speculation. So while this book does contain some supremacist beliefs and plans to kill all of the Nords, I believe that Athol is in the minority and his beliefs don't reflect the majority of the Dunmer population in Windhelm. So after deeply analyzing both the Dunmer and the Argonians' treatment in Windhelm at the hands of the Nords, what exactly is there to learn? Well, I think this whole situation is the biggest detractor for joining the Stormcloak Rebellion. Sure, Skyrim is a Nord land, so a Nord should typically rule it, but if it's at the expense of other races that have either lived in the land all their lives or races that have nowhere else to go, then I say that is just a really shitty leader. I think it's also interesting to note the difference between Skyrim Dunmer and Morrowind Dunmer and how different their political beliefs are. Morrowind Dunmer typically hate both the Empire and Argonians, while Skyrim Dunmer typically like the Empire and have no ill will that we can see towards the Argonians. I think it's also ironic how this situation of bigotry and destitution shows how much of a failure the Ebonheart Pact was back in the Second Era during the events of ESO. Some might hate ESO and think the Ebonheart Pact breaks canon, but I am of the belief that it shows how much time can erode various beliefs and ideologies. Besides, enemies can ally together for mutual benefit. The Nords and Orcs were ancient enemies in Nord mythology, but they still allied together during the Battle of Red Mountain against the Chimer. But go back to hating each other just as quickly. It also makes Brunwulf look like a really chill guy, wanting to atone for his time in the Great War by helping people regardless of if they're a Nord, Dunmer, or Argonian. And while he can't do anything of substance to help those people just yet because the war depleted most of Windhelm's supplies, both Dunmer and Argonians are for the first time optimistic about the future if he is in charge. Now, I know many Stormcloak lovers and Ulfric simps are going to type out essay-long comments nitpicking details to support their viewpoint, but understand that the poor treatment of the other races is not necessarily a Nord issue, as seen in Riften, or even a Stormcloak issue, because everything comes back to a single man, Ulfric Stormcloak. The Dark Elves and Argonians feel he is responsible for their plight. Ambaris even tried to get Ulfric to see how they live, but was ignored. Brunwulf will say that Ulfric won't lift a finger to help out anyone that isn't a Nord, no matter how many times he asks. And Ulfric's father, Hoag Stormcloak, seemed to treat the other races far nicer, and things were better. Then Hoag died, and Ulfric took the throne. And that is all I wrote! A video where I analyze the Dunmer of the Grey Quarter and the Argonians of the Docks, and try to disprove a few myths and common beliefs held by some, especially pertaining to the idea that the Dunmer of Windhelm hated the Argonians. I really wanted to make a video about this situation because what starts out as just some simple bigotry you see when you first enter Windhelm turns into something far more complicated and nuanced with many different sides. I'd like to thank my channel members whose contribution allows me to continue videos like these and buy buckets of Canis Root tea. And those members are Mirak, Sovdark, Conarunda, Nork, Will Ernst, The Proud Prince, Skooma Addict, JJ Ensid, Grud, Batman Man, Deadpool Maoista, Carson Friday, Ranger McKay, Tristan Pathfinder, and Partheon. And if you would like to see my videos earlier by either 24 hours or even 3 days, then consider becoming a member. All members get early access, and Oathman and Mouths will get shoutouts at the beginning or end of almost every video. So with all that being said, make sure to like the like button, like the subscribe button, and like the bell notification down below to be updated on future videos. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.